Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Health Babes podcast. We have Brendan Vermeire. He is the proud owner and founder of the Metabolic Solutions Institute for Functional Health and Fitness Practitioners and the Metabolic Solutions Research and Education Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to changing the way the world views mental health through advancing the science of mental health dysfunction. He is also the creator of the Mental Map, a cutting-edge lab panel for mental health. When he's not educating doctors and practitioners or helping clients overcome their most severe health challenges, Brendan enjoys all things fitness and is probably working out. He also enjoys anything in nature and any activities that expand his heart, mind, and soul. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. That was such a lovely voice. I could listen to that all day.
And she has the cutest Michigan accent that she said challenges. We love it.
I do. My A's are accentuated.
Very soothing.
Well, why don't we dive in? I want to hear more about your story and how you got into functional medicine and teaching. Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty good place to start. It's been a wild ride. I constantly, with each passing year, kind of reflect more and more on this journey that I've been on that, really started when I was 17, scrubbing toilets at Lifetime Fitness. And I had Navy SEAL aspirations at that point in my life. So when I turned 18, I went through all the testing and everything and qualified for the Navy SEAL program. I signed a 6-year Navy SEAL contract. And to make that long story kind of short, I was about halfway through boot camp for Spec Ops, and they found I had an inguinal hernia. They deemed it a pre-existing injury. Mm-hmm. So I was medically discharged. And I don't think people realize, it's actually not that easy to get into the military in the first place. I mean, you have to have nothing wrong with you, spotless record, no drug use, no injury, no psychological issues, just, nothing. You have to be a blank slate. So they'll scrap you if there's really anything wrong with you. And that was the case with me and several of my boot camp buddies. One guy had a kidney issue and he was peeing blood, so he got kicked out.
Wow.
And, as a young man, I was just a kid trying to figure out life. All right, I just graduated from high school. What am I doing? And I had these Navy SEAL aspirations all through high school. And that was kind of the sole thing that I was working for. So to have that taken away, kind of against my will, it really felt like an identity crisis in a lot of ways. So I spent about a year trying to get back into the military. And, I was trying to get medical waivers and exemptions so I could get back in. Mm-hmm. And, recruiters don't care. That's an impossible paper stack to try to push. So nothing was happening. And I was starting to struggle more and more with my mental health. And I think, whereas in high school, looking back, as a high school kid, you don't have any perception of what is, mental illness or depression. You don't have any perspective. But looking back, I probably would say I was like a high functioning, depressed young man. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I was so hard on myself and why I was pushing myself to do the hardest thing that a man can do, which is become a Navy SEAL. And I think there were some self-destructive ideologies that I wasn't really aware of. And I was just channeling them the only way that I knew how, which was to be the toughest mother effer out there and go shoot terrorists. Right. Mm-hmm. So when that fell through, I got my job back at Lifetime, scrubbing toilets, folding towels, just doing janitorial work. And I was really at this crossroads of I can either go be a college kid, which that lifestyle never resonated with me, jumping through the hoops of academia, making the grade, partying on the weekends. Nothing about that resonated with me. Mm-hmm. So I actually chose to then get certified as a personal trainer because I knew all the trainers. I was very enchanted by, the trainer lifestyle, and I was a huge workout dude. And I worked at the gym. So I became a certified trainer, started that career, and very quickly fell in love with, the art, the science of, exercise physiology, nutritional biochemistry, just the science of health. Right.
Yeah.
And the company, Lifetime, they had a lab testing program. So I was trained on, the value of lab testing and blood work, metabolic testing, like VO2 testing, just a very like evidence-based and data-driven approach to helping people reach their health and fitness goals.
Mhm.
So, with functional medicine, I feel like it's kind of this big melting pot, right? You've got medical doctors coming from the very conventional world. You've got naturopathic doctors and chiropractors and dietitians and health coaches, just this hodgepodge of different ideologies and backgrounds. So I came into it from the opposite side of the spectrum of, how do we optimize human health and performance? And then you start getting into, well, what moves us away from optimal metabolic health? So then you start getting into the realm of dysfunction and how do you identify dysfunction? And then before you know it, you're just kind of in full-blown disease. So that's really the organic evolution of my career, and how I got into functional medicine was coming at it from that side of the spectrum. And to wrap it up, I at first thought that, that background was maybe going to be a weakness for me, because I thought maybe people wouldn't respect me or my knowledge since I don't have a medical license. But I've actually found is my greatest strength. I see things that a lot of the doctors don't, because they weren't trained to look at health or really analyze dysfunction. They've been primarily trained on, managing disease more from that allopathic conventional model. So I think functional medicine is a beautiful paradigm.
I have to say, I am obsessed with your Instagram because I am such a visual learner, and you speak my language of infographics. So for those of you who have not seen his Instagram, it's _holistic_savage. And it's awesome because a lot of people don't talk about brain health the way that you do. And it's a very complicated, topic. So when you can see all these visuals, infographics that he does, it's just amazing. So you guys have to check that out. So speaking of the brain, why don't you kind of introduce us to the gut-brain axis?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the kind words on my artwork. It's I love making those graphics, and that kind of came from like my primary day job is training practitioners and providers and everything. And, I'm told I'm a good teacher, but I'm a visual learner myself. And, I obviously do tons of research, but as you can probably appreciate, usually the graphics and drawings and research papers that were generated by scientists, like they suck. They're ugly. They look like a kindergartner drew them. And so I'm just like, I can't teach with this. So I just need to draw on my own. And fortunately, I have a good graphic designer that is able to take my ugly sketches and turn them into those beautiful illustrations. But, I think there's a lot of those kind of technical mechanisms, and it's one thing to understand it conceptually, but then if you actually see the mechanistic kind of flow of how you get from, like dysbiosis in your gut to then how that turns into inflammation in the brain, it's like, well, that makes a lot more sense. So, with the gut-brain axis, which is horribly important topic and really kind of exploding right now. And of course, there's all these axes, right? There's the HPA axis and the OAT axis and the liver brain axis. But the gut brain axis is so huge. I really think we can kind of all agree that the microbiome and gut health is really in a lot of ways ground zero for your overall metabolic health or neural health in that way. So, from the kind of simple standpoint of the, gut mind's connection and, just looking at the different ways that the enteric nerve system and the central nerve system are really communicating in this bidirectional way, both through, nerve pathways like the vagus nerve, kind of that direct, it's like the hotline from Batman to Robin that just goes, straight up and down, afferent, efferent. But then you've got, the humoral pathway, as if you start getting a breakdown of the intestinal lining and the mucosal barrier, this leaky gut phenomena. You're getting all this translocation and migration of, different antigen proteins and toxins and pathogens and things that will then basically leak into the bloodstream, and that'll circulate up to the brain and circulate to that blood-brain barrier and cause the same phenomenon, the blood-brain barrier, this leaky brain phenomena. So this bidirectional pathway, whether the vagus nerve, the humoral pathway, that is really like the first thing that has to be kind of, assessed and, rebuilt in a lot of ways if we're trying to improve the integrity of the central nervous system tissue. So it's a huge subject.
So we always hear leaky gut, right? I mean, I think everyone at this point has heard that, but a lot of people don't even know about leaky brain. And, we kind of always say, like, if you have leaky gut, you have leaky brain. I mean, don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it goes both ways. Like you could have a leaky brain without having a leaky gut, but I think, just you look at the metabolic characteristics of chronic disease and the standard American metabolism, as I like to call it. I think we can pretty safely presume that the majority of kind of standard American individuals are having some hyperpermeability at both barriers. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I mean, and like I said, right, or you said, it isn't, 100% going to be both areas, but it tends to go that way. And people just don't even know what leaky brain is. So I love how you talk about that.
Yeah, it's huge. Like we're just now kind of getting enough weight of evidence behind the leaky gut thing that even, more conventional providers, they can't really deny it anymore because it's just the weight of evidence is too strong. But leaky brain, I feel like is still another like 5 years behind before it's a little bit more widely accepted.
I guarantee you, if there was a drug for leaky gut, everyone would acknowledge it.
Yeah. I mean, that's all it is, right? Like the narrative is the only narrative that we hear through the conventional, system is just whatever narrative goes in conjunction with pharmaceutical sales. That's very obvious right now, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy, but I think at one point, and this was a few years ago, I remember hearing they were working on a drug for leaky gut. And that's when more conventional medicine practitioners were starting to actually acknowledge it. But I have not heard of the drug come out yet. So I doubt it did. But yeah, it's interesting how that works.
Yeah. It's disturbing. And I think that's kind of the big thing. I try to help people understand that, because if people don't really understand the business model that is conventional healthcare, insurance, big pharma, big food, big tech, and, it's like, then they can't even really make informed thoughts or decisions or anything, because it's like they just don't get that business model and how that so heavily influences, what they're saturated with through the media. So
yeah, but so true. Or they get the rep coming in with their little roller suitcase and whatever drug they're going to teach them about over lunch, and that's what they're pushing. I mean, it's a, very similar story with thyroid medication. It's like they only want to prescribe Synthroid or, whatever. And they're very turned off to, NDTs. And I'm like, it's because those are the reps that are coming in, and that's what they're being taught by the rep. They learn it over an hour lunch break, and that's what they adopt. And then they're not even open, and not all, I mean, this is, generalizing, but they're just not open to maybe considering, hey, we might need T3 too. So it's what we run into a lot in practice. So it's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Can you, for the listeners who are thinking about, leaky brain, leaky gut, there's so many drivers, as we know, right? But can you kind of just talk a little bit about some things that can lead to that? I know you've been talking a lot about trauma too, and how like past traumas can really start to affect things. So can you dive into a little bit of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's really kind of the focal point of my whole work. And so it makes me a little bit sad, because the focal point of my reason, like obviously there's more like my research science goals, and then, what I'm communicating and teaching to functional providers, but then I have to figure out how to communicate that to, the masses in a way that they can. So it sometimes it's tricky for me, because it's like I have to know what audience I'm really speaking to, so I can adapt my language to, to be understandable by them. Because like this week with trauma, I kind of cycle through different topics and I try to, interconnect all of them. But with trauma, like we see through literature how psycho-emotional trauma increases inflammation, HPA dysregulation. It actually activates our microglial cells, which are the, basically sentinel immune cells of the brain. They regulate neuroinflammation and neuroplasticity. So I like to think of them as like the sentinels, but also the architects of the central nervous system, which is why all of my work really centers around microglial activation. So when it comes to the blood-brain barrier and, leaky brain, again, it's the microglial cells that really regulate that phenomena. So then the next logical question is like, well, what activates microglial cells, or what triggers this neuroinflammatory, excitotoxic, leaky brain cascade? And that becomes a huge conversation of so many different, as I like to say, input signals, right? Whether it's stress or trauma, whether it's more like a my microbial pathogen or toxin like lipopolysaccharide from that leaky gut, like that's a huge one, right? So I start breaking down these big lists of, more like pro-inflammatory neurodestructive input signals versus more, anti-inflammatory neuroprotective. And that's what's really cool about those microglial cells is they regulate both. And so if we want those microglial cells to help regenerate and heal the brain, like we have to give them, happy and anti-inflammatory input signals. Or if we were just trying to piss them off, then we can do that, very easily with, pro-oxidative and inflammatory. So when you look at like the standard American lifestyle, I mean, virtually everything about it is, pro-inflammatory and oxidative and just destructive in general. So this is where, like, when I consult with clients, I kind of clump them into one of two buckets of either this is more just like your standard American metabolism stuff, the, insulin resistance and hyperglycemia, the fatty liver, the dysbiotic leaky gut, stressed out, hormone issues, so on and so forth. But then there's kind of this growing demographic of the chronic complex illness, as a lot of us like to call it, where they might have something a little bit more kind of root cause sinister going on, like mold or Lyme or, stealth infections or heavy metals or whatever it is. But I think the majority of people, they don't need to go down the rabbit hole of the mechanisms, but rather focusing on, how can I naturally and holistically through my environment, through my psychological outlook and belief system, through my lifestyle behaviors and day-to-day choices, putting in those right input signals that your brain and its cells are able to heal themselves and regenerate the brain.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to simplify something because
Sure.
You're so smart that not everybody gets it the way that
Totally.
you do. Okay, so the microglial activation syndrome, can you break that down for like the listener that is just getting into the brain, just realizing there's so much going on there and thinks they may have an issue with this, with the neuroinflammation and all the things you relate to that. So how would you describe it?
Absolutely. So, classically, conventionally, we're really told, like with mental illness, that we don't fully understand, why it happens, right? And that is true, although that's almost like a, get out of jail free card that they like to play. Like, well, we don't fully understand, but here's the drug that has established efficacy, right? And so they're bypassing this whole conversation that if we actually had that conversation to kind of untangle, physiologically what's going on there, it really empowers that individual because now they have all these tools, all of these factors, all these choices that they're doing on a day-to-day basis that can greatly influence, their condition or their symptoms. So historically, we're really told like, oh yeah, mental illness, we don't really know why. It has to do with, neurotransmitter imbalances, right? So like, oh, you're kind of low in serotonin or serotonin activity. So that's why you feel depressed or sad or anhedonia or whatever. So here's, your SSRI to boost the activity of serotonin that might make you feel a little bit better. And that was me when I was 17. I was first put on a psychiatric drug when I was 17, no blood work done, no investigation, no referral to a psychiatrist or psychologist. It was just like, hey kid, you're a little blue. So here's Zoloft, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really messed up because it's like now we have all these stern black box warnings because it's like, oh yeah, it might cause sexual dysfunction or increased suicidal ideation, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, we're not using any data or evidence to assess like what's metabolically or physiologically dysfunctional in this individual, right? Like if they're diabetic and depressed, they need to be working on their blood sugar regulation, and that'll dramatically help, their cognitive function. So the neurotransmitter imbalance thing, that's based on the monoamine theory of mental illness and depression, which is just like an outdated theory to explain mental illness. And it's not wrong, but it's incomplete. So now what we see from the literature from the past like 10 to 20 years is that now we really see that those neurotransmitter imbalances and, dopamine or serotonin or GABA or whatever, that's really more downstream from some sort of inflammatory offense, right? So it's kind of weird to me how I think everybody kind of blindly accepts that, well, chronic disease is caused by chronic inflammation, or, the two go hand in hand, right? And we all just accept that, this idea of kind of a low grade inflammation, that slow cooking that's cooking your body long term and results in the heart disease or the diabetes or the neurodegeneration. So with that, it's like, well, what's neurodegeneration? Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death for Americans. And it's chronic neuroinflammation. Your brain is cooking for years and years and decades and decades. So we now can very safely say that inflammation is really the primary driving force behind all mental illnesses and neurodegeneration, which is a bold statement to make, but that's, what the science is pretty strong on. And the thing is, Big Pharma already knows this. They're already working on new types of kind of experimental anti-inflammatory drugs as, kind of a second line of treatment for individuals, struggling with their mental health, or they're looking at using diabetic drugs to treat Alzheimer's because the neurons become insulin resistant. So it really brings us back to what I like to call the inflammatory load. I think we all can kind of picture inflammation as like a forest fire. So if you think about your brain as a forest, if it's on fire, you're probably not living your best life. You're probably not feeling too great. Or you think about, how do you feel mentally, cognitively, when you have a fever of 102, 103? Like, you don't feel too great, right? And it's because that inflammation greatly disrupts the activity of your central nervous system. So, the microglial, that's like the really technical that I don't think most listeners, consumers, they don't need to worry about that cellular detail. It's just those are the cells that regulate the inflammation that causes the symptoms of, anxiety, depression, or result in these long-term offenses.
That was a great explanation.
Yes.
I can adapt to any audience. It's just kind of, what language is going to resonate the most.
For sure. Can you talk about the mental map? I know that you created this, so this is great.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm really excited about it. It's been a huge project and a labor of love, but ultimately, I didn't even get into like the juicy part of my story. I just kind of told like career-wise how I got to where I am, briefly. I mentioned that when I was 17, I was first put on Zoloft. And so it was 4 years later, kind of the post-Navy, I was starting my personal training career. But that's when my mental health was just, really getting worse and worse and worse, to the point that when I was 21, I found myself back in front of my doctor, same dude, kind of reporting the same thing. Like, yeah, man, I'm not feeling too great. Winter is coming up. I always feel, crappier during the winter, that seasonal affective thing. So this time he put me on a different psychiatric drug, which was Wellbutrin, a dopamine agonist. So like, oh, serotonin didn't work. Like, let's try a dopamine drug, right? Because that's all they do, right? That's the conventional psychiatric model, is literally just throw different, psychiatric nootropic drugs at somebody until you get that right cocktail that kind of keeps them balanced. It's just a lot of trial and error. And I'm not saying it's horribly wrong or evil, but I think there's a better way. But it was actually, so they put me on the Wellbutrin. They referred me to a clinical psychology and psychiatric clinic. I underwent formal psychiatric evaluation, and which was all subjective. No blood work, no lab testing. It was all subjective, questionnaires, clinical presentation. So then I was formally diagnosed with ADHD and major depressive disorder at the age of 21. Then 2 weeks later, I woke up in the intensive care unit breathing out of a tube because I had intentionally overdosed on my antidepressant drug. And it was not until I was in the intensive care unit that anybody ever did any blood work. And, at that point, my liver enzymes were in the thousands because I had poisoned my liver from the overdose and almost died. So that's my why, is we can do better than that. And that's really what's inspired my career and my niche and my research. With now I've developed a lab test specifically for mental health, which is the whole point of the test, is to really get down to those root causes of somebody's mental health dysfunction, which comes down to assessing their physiology. There's so many physiological functions that if they're dysfunctional at all, it's going to greatly alter what's going on in the central nervous system, whether it's something simple like a protein deficiency or some, vitamin nutrient deficiencies like B9, B12 and zinc and magnesium and whatever, or something a little bit more complex like inflammation, oxidative stress. So I designed this panel to really look at all of these core functions that are needed to have a proper functioning brain. So that way we can identify, like, where's the weak link in the chain? Why is your central nervous system not getting what it needs to thrive? So it's been a great project. We're rolling it out like now, doing a seminar next week for practitioners, and then rolling it out to the world, where it'll have this beautiful custom report that creates a custom generated report for each individual. And it shows, the markers that were out of range, the patterns detected, what it means, what each marker means. Because I really want to educate and empower people on, now they have data that reveals what's really going on within their body. So that way they can make more informed, choices through every aspect of their lifestyle and working proactively with their healthcare provider. So rather than just using these psychiatric drugs to kind of manage the symptomology, no, like, let's really get to the root of why this is happening in the first place.
I have a really good question for you because, and by the way, that sounds amazing. And I now want to go to your seminar.
Yeah.
I do too. I do too. It's going to be great.
So we deal so much with mold, especially when had a brick and mortar, because I'm in Florida. But a lot of our patients, we work with a lot of mast cell activation syndrome. So mold is a huge trigger for them, but mold is a huge trigger for, anything really, in my opinion. But so you talk a lot about mold and the gut brain axis. So and you have an awesome infographic for that, by the way.
Thanks.
But can you kind of give us a little bit of information on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. The mold gangster in me sees and honors the mold gangster in you, where I got really niche down into mold for a few years. It's a whole thing. There's a whole backstory there. I really blame mold for ruining my life and taking the life of somebody that I loved very, very much, who ended up taking her life because she was struggling really bad with what I, to this day, believe was mold illness, but I didn't know it at the time. And, I was trying really hard to, save her and whatever. And in a lot of ways, it was trying to save her that got me into functional medicine to begin with. It kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of, that's a lot of times that's what functional medicine is like you go down all these rabbit holes, methylation and parasites and mold and whatever. But with mold, when I first kind of got introduced to that subject, I was like, that's it. Like, that is exactly what I saw, in my ex-fiance when she was really struggling with her health. And I didn't know what was wrong with her, but she was bedridden and had, just chronic fatigue and chronic bodily pain and disorientation. And she became very volatile. And, I didn't know, and became emaciated too. I'm sure you see that from your mold, patients. They tend to either get kind of big and bloated and heavy and weight loss resistant, or they go the other way, which is just like wasting away and getting really emaciated. And so I kind of did all there was to do with mold. And finally it was like, why do I care so much about mold? And it's like, well, when it comes to root causes of mental health issues, like, I don't think it gets worse than mold, right? And I've had so many great conversations with Jill Krista and Lauren Tessier and Jill Carnahan, all of the big name mold people on kind of that mold brain phenomena, because it's just different. right? Like, mold brain is just such a different thing than these other, root cause factors. But when you look at mold is a very interesting subject. So it has to be kind of differentiated into like, are we talking more about like fungal dysbiosis and mold colonization in the gut? Because now we see that like, well, actually, even some of these mycotoxin producing strains like Aspergillus or Fusarium, they're actually a relatively normal part of the human microbiome. So then it kind of opens up more of a, gut health and garden of life and symbiotic conversation. But then, of course, there's the mycotoxicosis, just as, the mycotoxins might build up in somebody's system, or, those with certain genetic predispositions having that chronic inflammatory response. So mold is such a huge subject, and I love seeing it's exploding right now. There's a lot more awareness, and anytime I post about it, those are some of my highest performing posts. So people are obviously very hungry to learn more about mold, and for good reason, because I think it's affecting way more people than anybody's really giving it credit to. It's really common. Like, who hasn't been, substantially exposed? I just moved into this new apartment because my old apartment had mold growing in the airways, the ventilation system. So huge. And to your point, last thing I'll say, the mast cell activation, right? That plays right into the microglial activation. I mean, the histamine drives leaky brain and microglial activation. So I actually have in my seminar that you should come to, there's a little section about how mast cell activation can absolutely drive that neuroinflammation and microglial activation as well. So it becomes a very kind of vicious, self-perpetuating cycle.
So I have mast cell activation, and I was living in mold, and I've never been a depressed person in my entire life. I've never thought of any suicidal thought, anything like that. And I remember, because I didn't know I was living in mold, I couldn't smell it. Normally I could walk in and smell mold from a mile away. It was coming from underneath my bed. There was a leaky pipe and a crack in the foundation of the cement, under the carpet, and just this black mold breeding ground. I mean, it was dark under there, moist, whatever. And I was breathing that in all night, and I would wake up, I could barely walk. I had the most intense brain fog. I would get out of the room and go just make it to the couch, and I would literally sit there the entire day. And as the day would go on, I would get a little more clear, feel a little bit more functioning at a higher level, but still never really. And I remember sitting in my house and saying to myself, I don't want to live anymore. Like, I don't care if I die, because if every day is going to be like this, because I couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Yeah.
And I was like, if every day is going to be like this, I'm done. I don't, and so it is that real. It's the most horrible feeling I've ever had in my entire life. And so that's why we are passionate about helping people with mold, illness as well, because it's the worst, the sickest people we see. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard, and it's everywhere. I mean, some people think they can't get in a new house, and that's, absolutely not true. And we've seen people move from house to house to house to house. I mean, they just, because then their mast cells are so activated, they're becoming more and more sensitive to everything. I mean, it is a horrible, horrible cascade of bad events. So.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear you went through that. And, I can really parallel that, right? That was what my ex-fiance and I and her kids went through. And, she was the canary, right? Like, she was the one that just got demolished by it. And she ended up taking her life in 2020. And I attribute that because she never got better. She never got the help that she needed. And, I stuck around as long as I could, but she was kind of killing me too.
Yeah.
And, it was a horrible, and that's what's like, you've probably seen some of my content about, trauma and mold and kind of the mold trauma, because like there is that, right? There's this weird, and all my mold friends, we all agree upon this. We all have observed this anecdotally where, it's like these individuals that have a more pronounced history of kind of unresolved trauma in their childhood, like they're the canaries, like they're the ones that get really sick, which, I have dug up some, there's not like any direct link in the literature. There's nothing in the literature that says like, oh yeah, trauma and then mold. Yeah, no, but there are kind of these mechanistic stepping stones that create a very plausible explanation for why that is. But it's that, I mean, you just do not cognitively feel with it or yourself. And, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. It's the worst,
I wouldn't either. And I'm so sorry about your fiance. I had no idea. I did not know that.
I appreciate that. It was a long journey to kind of, heal through that. Like back in 2018, 19, I was really, hot and big on the mold thing, and just, I had a bone to pick with it, rightfully so, because I blamed it for a lot of things. And, I wrote a full article about it, and I just had to, that was a part of my own healing, right? Like, getting to the bottom of the mold thing, dealing with it and conquering it within myself and helping other people with it. That was a huge part of my own healing and coming out of that horrible situation. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a slow recovery. People always say, what did you do? And I'm like, what did I do? Like for one, I had to get away from the mold. For one, I found out there was mold and I got out of it. But I actually thought I had breast implant illness, and I took my implants out, and then I found the mold 2 weeks after. And I was like, seriously? And so, I had to do little, very gentle detox with like castor oil packs. I mean, little things just to try to move some things out. And eventually I was able to, do more, but it was a tough road. I mean, and so, yeah. And we see this in our practice that the people who come to us, they have to go very slow. So
yeah, I probably, get however many like DMs per week, people like, so how do you detox mold? Right. And it's just like, no, like stop, because what you said of like, what did I do? It's like, what didn't you do? Like you have to do everything. It forces you to like modulate and alter everything about your life and your diet and your because it's like you have to pull out all the guns and there's no shortcut, right? Like faster is not better, you have to go slow and steady and keep chipping away at it. And the mental map test that I created was actually inspired by a custom panel that I was running on all of my mold people. I worked with almost exclusively mold for like 4 years, and I was kind of doing custom, panels to just, because one of the things, right, is, functional medicine can get so expensive. We don't want to, with people that, they have to like move out of their house or sell their house or pay for remediation and, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of, supplements and biohacks, right? So you have to really consolidate and make the dollar go as far as possible. Otherwise, there's just no way. So, it's a long and hard road, and you test your resilience, to say the least, right?
Yeah. And luckily I was already eating really, really well. I mean, I'd already had all that down, I was living what I preach. And that's why I was so confused what was going on with me. And, and I just was very, very gentle with myself, because I knew that I did not want to just go into some crazy, protocol and, whatever. That's what we do with our patients, because we understand, but it's hard. It's not the same thing works for everybody either. So you have a lot of testing to do. And back to your point of, people having to spend all this money, like we had, someone on talking, he was a remediator, he could help people find mold in their house. And
is it Brian?
Brian.
Yeah.
Brian.
My dad zoom in Brian.
Yes, Brian.
Yeah. I love it.
And he was saying like this lady remediated her whole house and, got rid of most of her stuff and then put her armoire back in her room. And I would never have thought that mold can live in a wood piece of furniture. You know, like you don't think about, okay, now what do I have to get rid of? Now my stuff, like what clothes, your bedding, like, I mean, he was saying like, and he was great. He gave us like things that are more important to get rid of and things you can try to keep. And that's helpful when we're talking to our patients, but it is a bitch. I mean, it is awful.
Yeah. Not only, you know, physically, but mentally, financially. I mean, the whole rigmarole, right?
Yeah, which is why I think a lot of people, they need to be working with a professional, and you know, that's not a sales pitch. That's like, you need a guide through the journey. It's like the most treacherous, you know, trek that you're going to go on. It challenges you on like the deepest level possible, and you know, obviously not everybody makes it out of it. It tests you to the core, and so that's why it's like it's not just about like what binder to take or what's the protocol and how long do I have to do that. It's so much more. It disrupts everything about your life.
Yeah.
So
well, thanks for explaining that, because, you know, we have so many people who want to know, like you said, people are so hungry for information. So I was really like, that was the question I was looking most forward to asking you. And I appreciate your answer.
Oh, of course. I love talking about this stuff.
I know. Is the mental map test, is that available now or not yet?
It is. It's currently available to practitioners and then, you know, my private clients, and we're setting up all the kind of infrastructure stuff. So that way, like anybody in the world can buy it. And, you know, it's primarily blood. It's a blood and urine test. Most of the markers are blood markers. And my next project, as soon as we get through this launch, is I'm designing like an at-home version that's less invasive, because like there's 3 different versions, the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, just kind of good, better, best sort of thing. And, you know, even the 1.0 is like 10 vials of blood. So it's not appropriate for, you know, children under the age of like 15 and, you know, people that are really lightweight or have thin blood or whatever. So I'm designing like an at-home version that's going to be urine and maybe like a finger prick. So we want to kind of expand upon it to make it, you know, more utility for everybody and all of that. But it's available, and we're launching it to the world here within like 3 to 4 weeks.
Great. Where else can people find you?
Well, Instagram is my main platform. That's where I'm kind of pumping out all the content to the world. But as Becky and I were talking about, like, I don't know what Instagram is doing. I don't know if that's going to be the platform forever. But, you know, I've got a website, Metabolic, and I've got 2 Facebook groups, one for practitioners, one for, you know, self-healers and everything. So I'm not too hard to find.
What's your website again? Because you froze on that one. I want to make sure people have it.
Sure. It's metabolicsolutionsllc.com.
Okay. And we'll link to that in the show notes too.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, you have been awesome. I was so excited for this interview because I'm obsessed with your Instagram page. So,
no, she really is. She's
like,
I really am. You need to go look him. He's amazing. And then I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, thank you both so much. I'm cheesing over here because, you know, it's very flattering. You be like the babe thing. I get the name of the podcast. I'm just enchanted by you both. This has been a highlight of my week.
Aw, we're so happy to have you. You're great.
I think you two are great. I hope that we cross paths in person sooner rather than later.
Yes. Where do you live?
I'm in Kansas City. How about you both?
Okay. I'm in Florida.
And I'm in Michigan.
Oh, we're all sorts of scattered.
I know.
A4M in Vegas, though, if either of you will
When
be
is
there.
that?
It's like December 12th or something at the Venetian.
The weather in Vegas is nice in December, so we might meet up there, Brendan.
Hey,
get me out of Michigan those times.
Woo. Yeah. I might be hosting my own event in Kansas City in the spring, so I'll keep you posted on that too.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Awesome. I love going to stuff, and I miss going to seminars or events.
It's the best.
Really, it's where you make so many great connections, and that was one of the hardest parts of 2020 is not being able to do that. So,
oh, absolutely. I didn't realize that was my whole social life until it, went away. And I was like, oh, I don't have a
I
social
really
life
am a
anymore.
hermit.
Yeah, exactly.
How I feel.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
how I feel.
I love how you said my mold friends. I was like, yep.
Not to be confused with my moldy friends, right? There's a grammatical difference there that makes a big difference. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, you've been awesome. And I'm sure everyone's going to just eat up this episode. So thanks for coming on. And thank you everyone for listening. And we hope you all have an amazing day.
Thank you both so much.
Yep.